Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to investigate how a pristine temple of fine art was actually forged in the blood and the radical ideology of the French Revolution. You know, we usually think of art museums as these quiet, contemplative spaces, but the story of the world's most famous museum, it's a dramatic historical thriller. We're talking about a tale of mob violence, desperate political rebranding, and the complete redefinition of human culture. So let's dive right into this profound paradox. Picture this. It's August 1793. King Louis XVI has just been executed. The Reign of Terror is fully underway, and the guillotine is terrifyingly busy in the streets of Paris. Internal rebellions are literally tearing the nation apart. Yet, amidst all of this existential chaos, what exactly is the revolutionary government prioritizing? Well, they are frantically working to open an art gallery.
It is an almost impossible juxtaposition. Out in the streets, you have mass executions, mob justice, and total political collapse. But on the exact same day, safe inside the palace walls, state officials are meticulously cataloging Leonardo da Vinci paintings and organizing spaces for public education. To understand why the Republic cared so much about canvas and paint while the nation was quite literally burning, we really have to uncover the hidden forces at play here.
That brings us to Section 1, Fortress of the Kings and its journey from a defensive bastion to a royal playground. To make sense of the revolution's actions, we have to look at what the Louvre actually symbolized before the public was ever allowed inside. Originally built way back in 1190 as a defensive fortress, it was eventually transformed into a Renaissance palace by the 16th century. And for generations, monarchs used it to hoard extraordinary art, basically weaponizing culture to project absolute supremacy. Then, when Louis XIV abandoned it for Versailles in 1682, the Louvre just became this exclusive, neglected royal storage facility. It was a fortress of wealth that was completely, utterly barred from the everyday citizen.
Now, the concept of a public museum had actually been teased a few decades earlier, around 1750, but it was basically just an illusion of access. Down at the Luxembourg Palace, a small collection of royal leftovers was put on display. But get this, the public was strictly limited to visiting just twice a week for exactly 3 hours. It was a total token gesture of aristocratic gatekeeping. Art remained strictly private property, standing as a glaring physical manifestation of unequal wealth.
Which leads us to Section 2, the vandalism crisis and the desperate scramble for saving art from the mob.
As the monarchy physically collapsed in August 1792, a massive crisis emerged. What on earth do you do with the symbols of the old regime? The new government faced a terrifying wave of popular iconoclasm. The mob's desire was highly psychological. They wanted to erase history, destroy the coats of arms, burn down the monuments, and physically wipe out the oppressive ancient regime. But the state? They had a sudden, sobering realization. These artifacts held immense cultural and, frankly, financial value. They realized that art is power. If the mob destroyed the art, they were literally destroying the wealth of the new republic.
So creating the museum wasn't actually born from some noble appreciation of fine art. It was a desperate, urgent security measure. Just consider the frantic timeline of August 1792. On the 14th, the government actually issues a decree to dismantle monarchical items just to appease the furious crowds. But 5 days later, pure panic. They completely reverse course, declaring the museum's preparation an urgent national security concern. They realized they had to immediately rebrand confiscated aristocratic property as national heritage just to stop the vandalism. The museum was essentially a psychological shield, built to protect the art from the very people it was supposedly being liberated for.
Let's move to Section 3, Reclaiming the Royal Turpitude, focusing on that pivotal date of August 10, 1793.
And this brings us right back to our opening mystery, the very deliberate, highly symbolic choice of opening day, August 10, 1793. By opening exactly 1 year to the day after the Tuileries Palace was stormed and the monarchy fell, the state was making a radical political statement. They were signaling a massive transfer of sovereign authority. The private turpitude and the hoarded luxury of kings was now the communal property of the sovereign citizen. That fortress of exclusion had suddenly become a temple of inclusion.
On that inaugural day, the museum exhibited exactly 537 paintings. Now, while the Louvre today houses tens of thousands of works, back then, this initial collection was entirely unprecedented for a public space. Nobody had ever seen anything like it.
But we have to ask, where did these 537 masterpieces actually come from? Well, they certainly weren't peacefully acquired. They were essentially massive piles of loot. 3/4 of them came directly from the confiscated royal collection. The rest, violently seized from the Catholic Church and from the estates of aristocrats who had fled the revolution in absolute terror. The foundation of the modern museum was built entirely on the expropriation of wealth from the old elites.
The Minister of the Interior at the time, Jean-Marie Roland, oversaw much of this planning, and his words perfectly capture the ideological zeal of the era. He called the museum the most powerful means of elevating a nation's glory. You see, the state was treating the art not as mere decoration, but as a mechanism to fundamentally engineer human nature. They genuinely believed that by granting the public access to genius, they could manufacture a better, more enlightened Republican citizen.
Next up is Section 4, Blueprinting the Modern Museum, looking specifically at the Grande Galerie. So, declaring the Louvre a public museum was one thing, actually making it function as one was a complete logistical nightmare. The primary exhibition space they had to work with was the Grande Galerie. It was an absurdly long 460-meter corridor originally built by King Henri IV for one simple reason, to link two palaces together. Naturally, this space was completely dysfunctional for public display. It was a solid vaulted, terribly dark corridor relying entirely on lateral, side-facing windows. And if you've ever tried to look at a glossy painting sitting directly across from a bright window, you know exactly what happens. Massive glare. The public literally couldn't even see the newly liberated masterpieces properly. This seemingly mundane architectural flaw threatened to ruin the entire democratic experiment. But that set the stage for a visionary named Hubert Robert to step in and save the day. Hubert Robert was a painter and a key member of the museum's planning committee. He realized something absolutely crucial. To democratize the art, you had to fundamentally change the architecture. So he proposed what we now call zenithal lighting. This meant busting open those heavy vaulted ceilings and installing overhead glass skylights. The idea was to diffuse natural light evenly across the walls, completely eliminating the reflections. By solving a simple problem of glare, Robert inadvertently invented the architectural blueprint for virtually every modern art museum in the world today. But Robert didn't just stop at the ceiling. A 460-meter hallway is completely exhausting to walk down. To fix this, he proposed segmenting the corridor using pairs of Corinthian columns and transverse arches. This genius move broke up the monotonous perspective and naturally regulated the flow of visitors. Through pure architectural psychology, he transformed a regal hallway meant for kings into a structured educational gallery meant for crowds. He took a palace and he actually turned it into a museum. Finally, we reach Section 5, Trophy Case of Empire and the Rise of the Musée Napoléon. Of course, history rarely moves in a straight line, and the story of the Louvre takes one final, deeply ironic twist shortly after its democratic birth. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte. Under Napoleon, this very institution, meant to liberate art from oppressive rulers, was officially renamed the Musée Napoléon. As his armies swept across Europe, the museum was dramatically expanded and absolutely stuffed with the spoils of war. He looted Northern Europe and used heavy-handed treaties to seize absolute masterpieces from the Vatican, like the Laocoon and the Apollo Belvedere. The museum was no longer just a classroom for French citizens, it had become a sprawling monument to military conquest. Which leaves us with one final provocative question to think about. The Louvre began as a fortress, became a palace, and was transformed by a bloody revolution into a beacon of public education, only to be repurposed as a receptacle for imperial loot just a few short years later. So the next time you walk the halls of any grand museum, you really have to ask yourself, did the Louvre truly democratize art, or did it simply invent a system that replaced royal hoarding with imperial greed? It's a fascinating mystery, and one that historians and museum goers are still debating today.